Okay, so you will now be preserved for posterity, Natalie. Don't feel pressure.
No worries. It's just in regard to the data.
Yep.
So the sheet, which is the Year 9 results for each student.
Yep.
But I just don't quite understand how to read it. Towards the end, it's got a lot of hashtags, I guess you'd call them.
Okay. Let me find for you the relevant bit of the website, and then I'll screen share that, and we should be able to get at it. All it means is that the document that you're looking at was compressed a little bit. I think if you double click on it, but I don't want to lead you astray. I want to make sure we get this right.
Yeah.
So let's have a look and see if we can replicate what you've got. Okay, so let me just go to screen sharing, stop share. I'll go for a new share and we'll do that one. Okay, so let's have a quick look. School data for your analysis. So is that the one you're talking about, Natalie?
No, it's further along.
That one?
No.
That one?
Yeah, that one.
This one, the Gutman diagram.
That one.
Gutman, the one with the pink on the right-hand side?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Now, what are the hashtags? Oh, okay. B, C, D. Okay. Bother, I didn't know that had happened. All right, I'll fix that as a matter of priority. I think they refer to the student identifier or the student number. Yeah, so I'll get that information and clarify it for you. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Now, other questions on the Gutman diagram? Because they're just great. They're a really good way to cheat.
I just found it hard to get any information out of it. Is that just one class out of the whole Year 9 results? Because it didn't really seem to match up with the data for Year 9 that we were given, because they were quite above the state mean. Whereas this data, they don't seem to be particularly that high, their results.
Okay, so the one that was in the so the one that we've got here could in fact be the performance of an individual class measured against the state average, but it might not necessarily be the NAPLAN testing. So this could be some sort of diagnostic testing that was happening earlier in the year.
Oh.
So I needed to probably clarify that as well, but I'll check with the school principal and just make sure that I've got that right.
Okay. And also, where it says dimension, it doesn't give you the codes for what they are. I've sort of had a guess at what they are, but do they relate to the curriculum?
They relate, I think, to specific learning areas. Okay, so if I understand, the question that you're asking me, though, is how do you maximise the amount of information that you can get out of this diagram?
Yep.
So if I could tell you that, would that make you a happy camper?
Sure.
Okay, so let's have a look at this. And if you can help me to understand what you think the diagram means, as in, so that I don't have to do all of the work, because I always do the easy ones and you guys can do the hard ones. How's that? Okay, so let's pick a couple. Now, what do you notice about the first column in terms of identify the shapes in a 2D composite shape? What do you notice about the students and their responses?
Well, pretty much everyone's got it right except for 2 students.
Okay, so are you overly concerned about that particular skill or capability?
No.
Okay, so let's go over to the complete right-hand side and calculate the temperature by finding the size of a temperature increase. How'd they do? We can't actually say because there's only hashes, but let's pick the one under, actually we can say. Did any of them get it right? What about writes 1/16 as a decimal fraction given 1/8 as a decimal fraction?
So 1 student got it right.
Okay, so just looking at that diagram alone and those 2 examples, if you were looking to enrich performance, what is it, and I know numeracy may not be your area, but that's okay because we're about to get to a bit where we explain it. But in what area would you focus most?
Decimals?
Maybe?
Fractions?
So is it an issue of fractions or is it an issue of being able to divide by 2, recognising that 1/16 is half of 1/8?
Mm-hmm.
So is it in fact pattern recognition that maybe the children are struggling with? Does that make sense, Natalie?
Can you say it again? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at the orange box in the top of the diagram. Please excuse me as I peer knowingly at the screen. It says writes 1/6 as a decimal fraction given 1/8 as a decimal fraction.
Okay.
So it'd probably be something like the question on the paper would be, if 1/8 equals 0.00 whatever it is, then what does 1/16 equal?
Okay. So what are we supposed to...
So what I would be looking at there is if only one of these children has got it right, what are we not doing? What are we not covering or what are they not recognising? So this is the part where I was saying, get curious, why are they not getting that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't particularly like that question, let's go to correct state is 23. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across, which says solves a number problem involving proportions. Now, are more students getting those right based on those green squares?
Yep.
But not very many, or what percentage would you say overall?
That's 17%.
Okay, so that's not bad, but it's still, or is that the, I think it's the column next to it that we're looking at, the one that says solves a number problem involving proportions. So we've got 11% are getting it right in the school, 23% are getting it right at the state level.
Uh-huh.
So the first question I'm going to ask is, okay, so what are we doing at the state that we're not doing at the school?
Yeah. But even the state level's not that high.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you could improve successful students in that case by, say, 20%, then you'd be a third better than the state average by getting around 30%.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask so can we use you as a scapegoat, Natalie? Are you happy to do that? This is individual tutoring. Anyone can jump in, but we're going to solve your problems for you.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your area of focus? What's your area that your teaching area, or the area in which you'd like to specialise?
Oh, I don't know. I'm doing primary teaching, which is pretty general.
Okay, so is there a particular area of primary teaching that interests you the most?
Well, I do like maths, but
Good.
I'm a bit confused by this.
Okay, so liking maths, you're in the minority straight away. So that's great. The reason that I'm asking you to work with me is, what's your next favourite area that isn't maths?
Oh.
Erin or Chris, you can jump in here as well.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, Lily. Sorry, I didn't see your name there.
Okay.
Fire away.
So my area is design and technology.
Oh, cool. Even better.
So different from maths.
Okay, so so is it okay if we work on that one for a minute, Lily? And so what I would be thinking, if I was looking at this data and I was you working in design and tech, is if all of the children are having problems with proportions, what is it that I can do in my class that will enhance their capability to do well on that question? And then the next question I'd ask after that would be, well, how could I talk to the maths teachers to help them put an integrated program across the curriculum, so that irrespective of whether you're working in design and tech, languages, whether you're working in sciences, you're all working to improve the numeracy score of children, or the skills around proportions. Does that make sense, Natalie?
Yeah, it does.
Can I ask a question around that, Noel?
You sure, Erin?
When you mention that, are you talking about we're writing this from the perspective of what our discipline would be, or are we writing strategies for and including, say, art, maths, English, like sort of giving a little bit more specific guidance to maybe all our colleagues that would have different disciplines?
Can I answer that by not answering that?
Okay. Probably the latter. That's what I would do, I think, in this assessment.
Okay, I think that's great. The reason that I didn't want to come out of this particular closet and say, this is what you should do, is because some people may feel very comfortable working within a discipline area.
Mm.
And others may be thinking more holistically across the entire curriculum and thinking about, and Lord help us, that the mathematics and the English lit teachers should talk together, or the design and tech and the language teachers talk together. So when I said answer it by not answering it, can I give you two options? These are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but it'll give you a sense of how you might respond. So first, at the opposite end of the spectrum to you, Erin, what we would be talking about is only focused in one discipline area. So it might be design and tech, as Lily was saying, or it might be maths, as Natalie was saying. And so you constrain, if you like, all of the activities to those peers around you, and focus in on what you can do. Now, Erin, if I understand properly what you said, and I'm wrong about half the time, so correct me if I am, what you were saying is I'd be really interested to look at, say, that question on proportions as something that could be looked at in terms of art, maths, science, biology, and design and technology.
Yes, that's more what I was thinking. But is one more right than the other in terms of addressing the criteria?
No.
All right.
Um,
This is what I find really hard. I'm struggling with this subject. I want to like it, but I'm really struggling with that. That's why I'm hoping you can.
See, this is the cool part, and this is why I'm really keen to talk with everyone, so that everyone gets the sense that this is a divergent assessment. So if you want to play to a particular strength that you have, then do it.
Okay.
If you want to work more broadly, then do that too.
I'm happy with that answer, that kind of answer. Thank you.
So can I just pick up on that a little bit more, because I think it's probably really worth thinking about conveying that message to everyone, because I'm not sure I've done it as well as I would like. So can I tell you about why I've designed the assessment in the way that I have?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what the principals have said is, I want someone who doesn't have to learn how to lead on the job. And I want someone who can use data in a meaningful way to lead people from somewhere to somewhere else. And so what I've tried to do is set you up so that you have a blueprint in order to take to your first job and say, well, I don't have to think about the leadership stuff, because I've already thought how I'll lead. I've already thought about some strategies that I might use to get colleagues to work with me. And in the second part, you're saying in this second task, well, look, I'm analysing data because, only 89% of students get proportions wrong. So we need to do something about that. It's no longer sufficient to say, well, I've got a gut feel they need something about fractions. It's more about a handcrafted solution for individuals. So, Erin, and I'm coming back to you in just a sec, Lily. So, Erin, if you're thinking holistic, big picture across the entire curriculum, I think the likelihood of you being able to pull that off increases.
Excellent. And because I felt like that maybe shows a bit more leadership as well, and I guess that's kind of what we're all about. And so I thought by demonstrating that you can also support your colleagues in aims, it's probably doing that as well. Yes.
One of the things that I kind of tried to touch on in I think it was one of the last parts of Module 5, several colleagues kept saying, what's the difference between a strategy and implementation? And so I came up with the very, nationally important notion of bottle top identification. And that's in the column just to the right of the ones you see on the Gutman diagram. Sorry, I'm kidding. I shouldn't do that. But realistically, what I was suggesting there is ways in which you might get people on board, and how there could be strategies that would reach across the curriculum in order to enhance the outcomes. And it necessarily involved multiple people at multiple year levels. So, Natalie, if you're talking about primary and the general nature of that, I think it's probably harder to teach primary really well, but let's look at that general nature. So is there a way in which, if you note that children in year 5 or year 7 do poorly on a topic, that you could use this sort of data to track back what is it that we're doing and how is it that we could improve that.
Yeah.
Now, Lily, the question that I think partly we've talked about with Erin, but it's an important conversation, is how would you get, say, the language teacher to work with you in design and tech on issues of proportions, for instance?
Well, I know at the school where I work, it's quite easy to bump into people and talk to them. But in terms of actually seeing other people's programs and what they're doing, that doesn't really seem to happen a lot. I can imagine some elaborate idea of hosting some sort of like languages day where they where the food technology students need to produce products to sell, and then the graphic design students need to produce packaging for the products, and then they need to conceptually understand the size and limitations of their stall and how they're going to lay out their products. So that's quite elaborate. I can't think of a small thing.
Okay, so would it help if we just, because it's always lovely to start with something small and then go to something big once you've created a coalition of the willing. And
I just have no idea currently off the top of my head how I'm going to tackle proportion with a combined cross-curriculum languages and design and technology.
Oh, that's just one I chose to be particularly naughty in order to show you that maybe by collectively sitting down and thinking about it, we could come up with a solution. So I'm wondering if, let's choose something pretty basic. So if you were talking about food technology, for instance, then there's an issue of proportions within creating particular products or food types. So that's pretty straightforward. You could do that without really thinking about it, right? Now, to get the languages in, I'm wondering if how getting the languages teachers to talk fractions, get their students to name fractions. So that might reinforce the learning that was happening in your class around the technology aspect within the languages, so that the language becomes more firmly cemented and the idea of proportions becomes more firmly cemented in your class.
To further cement the language aspect in my class, would I do a cultural cuisine?
Perfect.
So I was feeling it was a lot more complicated than that, but it doesn't sound that way.
So what we've done is just come up with an example which was pretty harebrained on my part of languages and design and tech to say, well, there are things that we can do together. And the reason that I was picking on proportions is because a large group of these Year 9 students didn't do as well as they could here. So then I wanted to go on and pick up on that next point, which is, so you don't have any problems identifying the sort of tasks. So you've gone from picking a relatively small task that would benefit students across both of the subject areas. And then you've talked about that really big holistic task in which people were looking at stall size, products and packaging, labelling, and also product. So you can think about the big issues and the small issues, which is great. Now, where does the leadership come into this?
Coordinating multiple people.
Yep.
And so that you're working to a cohesive goal. Everyone's aiming for the same thing. which is to improve the numeracy skills
Yep.
of the Year 9 students.
So how would you do that?
I can tell you how not to do it.
Oh, I like that.
At our school, it was identified in our NAPLAN results that spelling was a really big problem. So obviously literacy. And so someone thought it was a great idea to print out all these posters, which, may I say, as a graphic designer, were really poorly designed. And they put them up in every classroom, and that was it. And they basically told kids what to do if they didn't know how to spell a word. But there was no further communication between teachers about it. There were no extra strategies and teaching strategies given. They just put these posters up and thought it would solve the problem. So that person didn't lead that initiative very well because they didn't communicate to their team members what the purpose was. Everyone knew that the goal was to help kids spell, but they didn't really support their team members in making that goal happen.
Okay, now there's two really interesting elements there. So I'll write them down because I sometimes get short memory. The first element was the negative, and the second element was the leadership. Okay, so has everyone got an example that they can point to, they've experienced in their life or they've experienced as part of their professional placement of leadership gone wrong? So we just had an example from Lily.
I could say maybe from my own experience in my workplace at the moment, is that every day we just get told to write down our goals. And it's just, they want like keywords like passionate and like working retail, and it's like dazzle customers. Like it's just, and I feel like it does not motivate me. It's just all just corporate fluff. I don't know any other way to describe it. And I feel like it's just a token thing from the guys up top to like say, yep, we're being accountable for what we sell. And being that it's my part-time role, I'm like, well, you probably need more to motivate me than that.
You know, there's an interesting series of things that happen, and I warn you about it now. What you'll find often in organisations is someone in HR will read a book that'll say, to get the best out of leaders, we need to be able to help them to improvise. And so then they'll read a book that says, really good leaders are jazz musicians, because they don't have any notes written down, so they just improvise as they go along. And the next thing that will happen is there'll be about 4 or 5 seminars happen within an organisation that has jazz musicians teaching people how to improvise. Does this sound dazzling to you and you really want to, you know, thrill the customer? Is there anything similar that you can think of there, Erin?
No, but I don't know. It's just, I just think that that's something that, yeah, it could be more, but it's also something that we all sort of talk about, and we all agree that we want to give good service and all that as much as possible, but just writing down words like that, we tend to just go for the same words all the time and just recycle them because we're just trying to actually answer the question that management want from us.
So here's the point of the example about the jazz musicians. There'll be a fad. Someone will read a book about jazz musicians and then there'll be all this PD, and then people will go in for that style of professional development. And then someone else will read about the jazzy word to motivate the salespeople. And then that'll come down and so on. And mindfulness is what Lily's pointed out. Thank you, Lily. So there are a range of elements that we can come to terms with.
I'll use that one next time, thanks. Sorry.
Sorry?
I was just responding to Lily. I said I'll use that one next time.
So the point that I'm making, though, is that you've alluded to some of the problems that come around leadership fads. And I think if we look seriously at leadership, we can talk about all sorts of styles and approaches. But the central element is ask of yourself more than anyone else has the right to ask of you, and people will be thrilled to work with you. It's about making them feel as if they're valued, that their contribution is worthwhile, that they have a positive and really critical element to make, really critical contribution to make to the group. So if I can go back just a little bit to Lily's comment earlier, in which you were saying you could tell me how not to do it. So can we use that as an example? Because most people have got a negative example that they can relate. So it could be dazzling. It could be using poorly designed materials and that weren't very aesthetically pleasing, and not actually tell anyone what they were meant to do or how they were going to use those. So Lily, if we can just call on you for a moment and turn around everything you've said. What would you do differently? Let's brainstorm this, because you'll see coming to the fore a sort of a strategy, and we'll talk about some of the ways that you could lead it.
Well, I would call, perhaps if I was a head of department as opposed to a graduate teacher, I would gather the other heads of department at the fortnightly meeting, and we would look over these issues with the numeracy of results, and we would, as a group, as we've just done here, decide what we think the main numeracy issue is beyond the question, thinking of what the concept is that isn't being understood, and then work out what we already do in our classrooms that we think addresses that. And if we can't think of anything, then perhaps listen to what other people do and see if we can adapt that to our classroom. Perhaps then there would be some time for everyone to think of their own ideas that would then be proposed, which we would then maybe pick the best of them and work them into a bigger plan that we could implement, which then you delegate roles to different people so that the plan and the strategy could be implemented.
Sounds very good to me. What's everyone else think?
On one placement, I was lucky enough to be at they had a PD day that was very similar to something like that. So yeah, it wasn't NAPLAN, it was actually BCE results from the previous year, but you know, same kind of thing. It was sort of a bit of what this is about. It was sort of helping. They had someone come in from BCAR to explain how to read results. Then they went into their discipline areas and talked about and brainstormed ideas, and then came back and they had some of the AP and a few other leaders sort of run the thing. So then that also leads me to ask, because I like that idea, when we're delivering this assessment, can we sort of design something like that? Like as in the kind of strategies, or this is what we'd sort of deliver?
Okay, so it's an interesting question, Erin. Can I answer that this way? If you were designing a strategy, by all means, tell me what the strategy would be. And then tell me what are the things you would need to lead in order to implement the strategy. So if we were looking at, say, Lily's example, and correct me if I've missed any steps, Lily, you started talking about getting together with the heads of discipline. And the only very small correction I might make, or additional thought I might provide for you, is you don't necessarily have to be a head of discipline to do this?
I don't know, in my school that I am currently at, there is certain protocol for being able to put forward ideas. So if I have an idea for a creative arts program, I talk to my director of creative arts. If I have an idea for a student wellbeing program, I talk to the head of student wellbeing, who then present it not I say further down the rung, but kind of. I don't necessarily get the opportunity to present an idea to a wider audience.
Oh, no, and that's perfectly fine. The only suggestion that I would perhaps add to what you've already said is maybe you and perhaps a group of like-minded colleagues could collectively present to the heads of department.
Yeah, that would make it more relevant than I see for myself as a graduate teacher. Yes.
The other thing that I just wanted to pick up on before I go back to the negative brainstorming is there's an illusion that people have to hold a position of authority in order to assume a leadership role. And there's no good evidence for that. You can lead from anywhere within an organisation. And I think that's a critical element that if I was providing feedback to the class on task one, many people are saying, oh, look, I'm only a graduate teacher. How can I influence something? And I talked a little bit in the previous discussion about how two new grad teachers did influence enormously across a school. So I'd seek to encourage you all to be thinking in that way from the start.
I definitely agree with that statement. And I myself, as an assistant in the department, an assistant to the teachers, have found myself leading a variety of small projects, some bigger. And I think that leadership comes to the person who's passionate about whatever it is they're trying to change. And so when I say, let's make better learn how to spell posters, I'm the one who actually cares how they look. So therefore, I'm the one that's going to be able to lead that project most effectively because I've got the passion.
So then you'd have teachers specialising in literacy, teachers specialising in other areas that you might go and say, look, here's my idea. Would you be interested in working with me on this? And then you would take that and present it to the heads of discipline. Now, this gets back to your question, Erin, which in essence is how do you frame the idea? Do you provide a full, rich development of this concept down to the concept of learning materials and resources? My suggestion would be, that's good if you've got a lot of spare time, but I would be spending more time thinking about the sort of things that we were just discussing, focused in largely on how am I going to do this? Who am I going to get on board to work with me? How will we work together? How will we respect each other? And so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what you're saying is that we don't have to have all the answers.
Geez, I don't.
Do you know, I've actually just had a light bulb moment a little while ago. I've read the task that many times, but so we only need to focus on a couple of areas out of all the data we're given, right? We don't need to be able to interpret everything. So if we just choose like proportions and then maybe one other area, oh my goodness. I can't believe it didn't occur to me earlier.
Thank you, Erin. I had no idea either. I was thinking, I've got to do all of this.
I've got them all printed out. I'm out here and I'm poring over them like, how do I understand this? But if I can just focus in, oh my goodness, that would make more sense.
So what we're about here, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this sort of conversation, what we're about here is, if we can just expand that thinking just a little bit, Erin. So, for instance, if I go back and look at, bear with me while I share screen, oh, wrong one. I will go there. Okay, can everyone see the screen with the Gutman diagram on it?
Mhm.
Perfect. Okay, so if I were looking at that, I would look at areas not only about proportions, but I would see what are the commonalities between what people are getting wrong at that higher end. So where you're getting massive columns of pink. So, for example, we've got the proportion one. We've got the second one from the right. Hang on, I'll just put my pointer on because I can. More.
Could you zoom in on the ones you're talking about because we can't read them?
Oh, I hate it when that happens. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Control Z. No, it doesn't want to work, so you will bow down before me. No, it doesn't want to do that either, so view, zoom in. Okay, come on.
Noel,
Yep.
it wouldn't be a matter of most of the kids have run out of time on the last questions, would it?
It could be. It could. So that's definitely an option. So if you recognise that was what was happening, what might you do to improve the students' performance?
Maybe give them more practice working under test conditions or something.
That might be one solution. Is it that they were second guessing and so they were going back and continually looking at previous answers?
This isn't necessarily in the order that the questions were asked.
No.
I thought I'd just...
Got the question numbers though down there.
No, we don't have the question numbers, or do we?
Like the N.
Yep, item number, we do. So these are groups of questions.
So is that the order that they were asked in of the students? Oh, you actually got N23, then N18, then N22. So is that the order? Right.
Yep. So what I was getting at, though, is if we've got an issue of proportions here, that particular one. Okay, so what's something else that they get wrong a lot of the time? So it's anything over to the right. So let's have a look at this one. What's that got to do with proportions?
Perception
Yep.
of distance and like conceptual understanding.
So it's about being able to conceive in three-dimensional space.
Yes, so, and being able to put down and relate speed to distance.
Yep.
And have a general understanding of what would be a logical answer.
Yes.
Before actually knowing what the answer is, you can disregard certain answers because they just don't make sense if you think about it.
Yes. That's a good answer. So let's look at this one, if I can pull it up. I'm getting there. That one. What's that an example of?
Spatial intelligence of understanding, being able to, in your head, pull apart the cube and know that all those lines add together to make one long line.
Yes.
If it was made of matchsticks, for example.
That's a really nice example.
So what you do in class is, I remember when we made shapes with matchsticks or toothpicks. So if you actually do it physically with something that can be moved, then it's some children will find it easier to understand than just having a picture on paper.
Because they're more tactile in the way in which they're conceiving, and by having a two-dimensional representation, they may not be necessarily able to manipulate things to understand that you can pull things apart.
Yeah, because even in my head, I see all the sticks and I pull them apart and line them up, but I also know the mathematical calculation. So that would be 12 times the side, I believe.
Okay, so let's take the examples that we've been talking about so far. We've got a problem involving proportion, we've got an average speed, and we've got a total edge lengths of a cube. So often when I'm looking at these sorts of issues, when I'm trying to diagnose what's the root cause, I ask myself a really straightforward question. What have they all got in common? Sometimes it's not easy to always answer that, but what is it we think they have in common? Is there a particular way of thinking that if we provided it to students, it would make it easier for them to perform well in these areas?
Well, what they all have in common is that they're everyday things that we see in our life. So it's very relevant maths, rather than it's not in some sort of random equation or trigonometry algorithm, something like that, that people don't see as relevant, even though they are. So these are all things students experience, but maybe they haven't actually experienced them. So it's about perception is what my concept is, but I'm not sure if that's too broad.
Well, let's play with that for a little while, because as you were talking, I was listening too, by the way, Lily, heard every word you said. I was thinking to myself, okay, so what is this an example of? And then I was thinking, I'm a bit stumped, but it's probably a good thing that we're discussing this so that we can see and work through together the processes that we're going through in order to find a solution. So if I look, for example, at proportion, we've kind of talked about that. We're talking about the edge length. So as you say, I think that's something to do with three-dimensional spatial awareness, or being able to conceive, objects manipulated in some way. Is there something about proportions as well that might come in there? We're working this as a problem. It's not something that, anyone should feel they should have an answer to, but let's start thinking about it. What's common? Someone who hasn't contributed yet, there are no wrong answers. There are only answers on the way to a successful solution. So there's definitely a calculation element in the first two. The proportions, something is proportional to something else. And then you've got the calculation around distances to be able to break something down into components. And then the total edge length, that's breaking down something into components even more, isn't it? So is this about being... Go ahead, sorry. Who was that who chimed in? Please speak up. Okay, you're going to let me keep wondering. I'm just warning you. Okay, so is this about being able to break down complex elements into smaller solvable units? So as Lily was saying, for instance, she conceptualizes immediately on seeing a cube the matchsticks that go all the way through. And so it's easy for her to say, all right, let's lay them out step by step. And then we can measure it really easily. So let's start thinking about that in terms of calculate the average speed given distances and times for a two-part journey. That's kind of like the matchsticks, isn't it? You've got to have two parts to the journey. So the question that I would be asking is, how well do we do this identification of what the problem is? I think this is kind of what you were touching on before, Erin, with the PD day that people were, that you participated in at your school. Okay, so now we've identified that maybe maybe the key issue is that students aren't yet able to conceptualise how to break down problems into solvable elements. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so if that was the case, then we might want to sit down and think about, well, how could we do that across the curriculum? How could we think about it? You know, how could we improve that element of improving people's notion of breaking problems down into smaller, manageable pieces in the classroom? What would that be like? And how would I know that the students were able to do it? So that's kind of looking at one example of some of the data. So it's not only about proportions, but it's thinking about, well, what's this an example of? Is it an example of trigonometry? Is it an example of language challenges? Is it an example of literacy? What is it? And then the question is, so that involves a fair chunk of thinking. So Erin, if you could do that alone, I think that would evidence quite high quality thinking about what are some of the issues that you could address. And then as we were saying before, then it becomes, so what are the things that you would do in order to lead others to implement a shared vision and a shared strategy?
So where it asks about 2 or 3 areas, is that just counted as one because that's sort of improving numeracy, or if we're looking at...
So what I meant by that improve in 2 or 3 areas, I'll leave it open to interpretation. So what I meant by that is it could be focusing in on multiple elements of numeracy, or it could be reinforcing the learning across multiple discipline areas by getting, as we were saying earlier, Lily, colleagues across multiple disciplines working together and talking through some of the issues. Everyone happy with that? Now,
Also, how related do they need to be? I'm just sort of looking at all what we've been given. It looks like there's some primary and some secondary. Would you sort of look at just the secondary data, for example, or could you look at some primary, some secondary?
okay, so can I use Natalie as my example here? Not that I'm picking on you, Natalie. You just said you are primary, and so I thought, great. A lot of people are thinking in terms of this data, well, if it's secondary, it doesn't apply to me. But I think if we start thinking about tracking back from years 9 to 7 to 5, it does kind of lead into primary. So if people are experiencing challenges in getting this stuff right in grade 9, then I would be asking the question, is there a foundation in the area in which I teach that I could do something about?
Yeah, because that's where I'm secondary and English is one of my disciplines. So I'm quite interested in the year 5 writing from NAPLAN, but being that I'm not, really teaching that year or, primary, but this is a prep to 12 school. Is that correct?
Yep.
So, yeah. So being from the English department, improving things like paragraphing and text structure, I'm not surprised that they're things that students struggle with because from my own experience, and that's why it'd be something I would be keen to address early.
So if you were, just say you were teaching in year 9 and you were looking at the year 5 data, Are you identifying the same sort of issues in your discipline year as they're identifying in year 5?
Yeah, I've got no official data, but from, like, I've taught year 9 on both placements. Just for an example, it's probably the youngest year level I taught, but yeah, looking at those things, even from the year 5, I can see, while I don't have official data from that, I think they are the areas they struggle with the most.
So if there was something that you could use data-wise in order to hone in on the specifics of what the issues are, then it would seem to me to be fairly logical then to say, well, how would we address the issues in year 5 if that's where they're taught, and how would we reinforce it in years 6, 7 and 8 in order for them to be performing even better in your year level?
Yep.
Now, obviously, you're not going to go in and say to the teachers in the intermediate year levels, hey, folks, the teaching you're doing is really bad. You're not getting the outcomes that we need. So you better establish some pretty good rapport and some pretty engaged relationships as a first port of call. But let's assume you've done that. Then it might be a really good place to be starting to think about, well, how could I win those staff members over? So for that, you might need to be thinking strategy. You might need to be thinking, tea room conversation. Look, I notice this is an area, whether it's proportions or whether it's paragraph structure or whatever, and you have that conversation with people who are teaching in earlier year levels. And I'll bet money, and I'm not a betting man, I just emphasise that, but I'll bet serious money, probably as much as 50 cents, that they're going to say the same as you. They're going to say, oh, kids today, they just can't do paragraphs. And so then you've started opening up a conversation around a particular topic that is of mutual interest to you all. And then the next part of the conversation might be, well, what do you think we can do about this?
Yeah, and so by...
To everyone?
Sorry?
Erin, does that make sense?
Yeah, but just go and on that, where you said, if you link it with real data and that it is a trend, how do we do that? Because we've only got what we've got here. Because I'm guessing that would address a justification, like that would show a really solid justification of why you would address those things. Sorry, I'm a bit confused.
No, you're making perfect sense. So what we would be looking at is, what are the trend lines? And I'll just pop down and share screen for a moment. Okay, so let's look at this one, numeracy. It's not because I'm particularly focused on numeracy, it's just the one that I've got in front of me. Can everyone be happy with that? Okay, so what's this? The mathematicians amongst us, not picking on anyone. What's this mean? Let's have a look. So, were the classes in year 7 performing better or equal to the state mean in, say, 2011?
Worse?
Worse, yep. What about 2013?
Better?
And what about 2015?
Worse.
Okay, so what's that telling us in terms of the means for the school over time? Is there any line on the diagram that might help us with that?
Yeah, that orange one.
Yep. So although it might not be significant, there is a trend there.
It's going down.
So
Actually, I was going to say it's almost, not quite, parallel to the state's mean decreasing, but just a bit lower. So nothing has changed in terms of the school's position with the state, has remained quite similar.
So what we're talking about is what a colleague laughed at me the other day when I labelled it this. What we're talking about is serial underachievement at a particular school. So let's go and have a look and compare that with the next diagram down. So everyone can see this one. Hopefully everyone can read it now. What are we seeing here?
The cohorts that took it in year 7 performed fairly similar in year 9.
Yeah. What do we notice about the school mean in year 9 though, over time?
Going up.
Been going up, yeah.
So the question that I want to know straight away is, what are they doing between year 7 and year 9 to get the turnaround? And if there's an area of lack of performance or serial underachievement in, say, year 7, what could we pick up on in this Gutman diagram that sets out areas in which students didn't perform as well as they would like, as well as we would like them to? So let me take this number. Can everyone see that highlighted number? It's under SP, above question N19. Okay, so for our school, we've scored 25% correct against the state average of 46. Or let's look at our proportions again. The state average is a little bit more than twice as good as our school average. So what we could argue, I think reasonably, is that focusing in on proportions and solving problems in terms of total edge lengths is going to yield a significant improvement in terms of what students are able to do compared with the state average. Is that making sense, everyone?
Yeah, it's really starting to become a lot clearer. I can see the haze moving as you speak.
Well, I'm glad that I'm foghorn and I'm clearing out that haze. So what we're talking about in essence then is the question was justification. And I think we can do that in terms of saying, well, these areas, say, solves a problem involving proportions, our students are performing less than half as well as other people in the state. And then as we were talking about before, what's this an example of? Is it that three-dimensional spatial understanding? Is it something else? Because you want to target not only proportions so they get them right, but you want to solve the problem of whatever's causing this challenge for the years that follow. So that may involve you with language teachers and design and tech, or primary maths teachers, or literacy English methods, thinking about how would we work together in order to identify issues with proportions that we can teach across curriculum.
So would you focus on just one problem, or would you be better off focusing on an area like measurement or something? Because it seems like a lot of work for one problem.
Sorry, Natalie, can you just say that last bit again? I interrupted.
I said it seems like a lot of work for one question on the test.
Yes. Okay, so the point that you're making is would you spend a lot of time just focusing in on proportions? And the answer is absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you got the key message there when you said, is this a problem of measurement, or is this a problem of conceptualizing different measures?
Okay.
And so proportions alone, a lot of work to do it, but, you know, is that the best use of your time? Whereas if you can start thinking about, well, what is proportions an example of, then you can start thinking, well, units of measure, breaking down problems, identifying a fraction of this and a fraction of this. So maybe it's something as simple as fractions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so have we answered people's questions in terms of how you might focus in on identifying an area, even though you may not necessarily be working in literacy or numeracy? Lisa, Michelle, how are we going? Is this becoming clearer for you too?
Kind of. I think I have to try and think about it and work it out. But my question was, how do the statistics about like poverty and all that, how does that come into like our plan?
Okay, poverty, etc.
Like I saw that, you know, people that, if they're students that have done worse in the NAPLAN are probably the ones that haven't got the resources and they're from the lower socioeconomic. So, I mean, would you, I don't know, can you focus on something like that, or?
Let's have a look at the data first and then let's talk about it. Sorry, yep, that's the one. Bear with me while I go back. Okay, so what we're talking about is this data here. Can everyone see that? The first line that I've put on the screen says Hogwarts School Fact File. Everyone picking up on that?
Yep.
Cool, thank you. So, Lisa, your question is, how do these facts influence what you might be thinking of doing within the school system? Okay, so let's look at this, because one of the things that I think Erin perhaps has said that she's grasped now more fully is that there are multiple ways in which you could answer this question. So let's look at this. Families and carers for students, there might be 20% underemployed or unemployed. So what's that telling you about the home environment of these children?
Probably that they don't have the time or the resources or the support that they need.
Okay, so they might not have the resources that you would like them to have. Their parents have probably got time, although I'm sure that they're working very hard at finding that job that they would so much like. But let's look at the next stat. 24% have income below or at the poverty line. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people who live in poverty, it's very difficult for people to conceptualize it, but people living in poverty will likely have a car, somewhere to live, a television and a telephone. Now, that's quite different to conceptions of poverty in, say, the 1930s, 1940s. But what's that telling you about not only how much time and how much resource that these children may have access to, but what's it telling you about the group itself? So I'll ask the obvious question. How much is 24% of the entire student population?
A quarter.
Right. So what we're saying is a quarter represent children that come from some of the lowest SES backgrounds. So one of the things we were mentioning earlier, Lisa, was how do you justify focusing in this area? And the answer is, well, a quarter of people are coming from households at or below the poverty line. How do you think that might impact on their ability to attend if their parents don't have the capacity to pay for bus fares or transport them to school?
Yeah, so they might miss out on a lot of school.
You're on the right path now. So if they're missing out on a lot of school because their parents can't get them there, is there anything that you or a group of teachers who were maybe driving past those children's homes could do?
Okay.
Yes, but that might present an ethical dilemma.
It could present an ethical dilemma, and maybe it's not you who does it.
And a reliance on intervention, therefore the parent won't actually change their behaviours to support the education of their child because they know the school are just going to chase it up for them.
Okay, so what Lily's saying is quite right. Maybe that creates a sense of dependence, and that in the long term that may not be beneficial for the child, and I couldn't agree with you more. Equally though, I'm wondering whether by solving the short-term issue as the first part of the solution, that might help the parents and families and the children to be better prepared educationally and in other ways to accept the next step in which parental behaviour and parental opportunities might be influenced.
Well, there as well, you could also link with, like down I think near the bottom, it says 65% parental carer satisfaction. That could be something that would, if you, it says care for children's education and engage the community. If you facilitated the ability to maybe have carpooling or like a more community type thing about it, you'd be then linking to that and possibly improving that too.
Erin, that's a great suggestion. And I suspect, and I can't name the school unfortunately because I think they do excellent work, one of the things that they do is that sort of, oh, we can't get there? Okay, we've got someone who's out that way who could come and get us, or we've got a carpool. Have you heard about that? So that there are ways and means in which people might be able to engage to address issues. And I suspect the 65% satisfaction that we're seeing there shows a responsiveness to the community. 65% is pretty high in terms of parental satisfaction. There's one school that I know that went from, I think it was about 35% to 80% parental satisfaction, and they did it over 2 years. And it wasn't one thing that they did, but it was a responsiveness to everything. So we're talking about distances from schools. We're talking about nearly 10% speak languages other than English at home. We're talking about high levels of satisfaction. We're talking about nearly 10% of them, if they graduate from high school, they would be first in family to do so. So what's that telling you about the community that you're serving?
Well, perhaps the focus doesn't actually need to be book smart and academic smart. and maybe that community is a lot more practical and industry based. Maybe they're farmers and builders. So maybe you need to have that more relevant curriculum.
So now we're starting to think about what are the key issues. So Michelle says, I'm also thinking about any interventions or strategies, making assumptions for these students. Have they got the internet at home? Is it reliable? Do they have hardware to access? You need to keep these things in mind. Okay, I'm 150% behind you on that, Michelle. What's interesting to me is Bendigo, let's take the place where I work and the community that I serve as an example. I can drive about 7 minutes from, probably about 8 minutes from the university, and we literally have people who are living in abject poverty. Now, clearly I'm investing my time working with you folks and working with people in the schools so that we can redress that somehow through improving education. But the point Michelle makes is well taken. You know, some of the families have, if they have internet, it might be dial-up only speed. So we can't necessarily always assume that if we're ascribing homework to children or that they'll be able to access information on the internet. So we need to be thinking about how do we support the families in the space that they're in, and how do we connect the opportunities that we can bring as a school community to support those less fortunate than us. So, Michelle, your comments are exactly right. This one, if it was a regional school, I can't say because I promised the print. We need to be thinking about access, equity, all of those issues. So Michelle's observed no point sending home a subscription for an online program. Yeah, probably right. But I think what we're talking about is how do we find out? How do we find out what the needs of this particular school are and this particular cohort of people are? So, Michelle, your point is well taken. How do we target the specific needs of this group? So there's no point if we go back to that Gutman diagram and focus in all of our activities on the left-hand side of the screen where we've got absolute, everyone is getting it right, to what's happening on the right side of the screen on one hand, or if, as Lisa, you said, you wanted to really focus on things that we could do to measurably improve the well-being and access to resources for this school community, that would be a real strength that you could bring. Justification is really easy. This impacts on 1/4 of our students. So does that touch on most of the issues that you were thinking around how you might approach this? Because, pardon me, still sick. What else could we do or say to help you think more holistically about the problems in front of us? Much better. Now, so does that kind of answer your question, Lisa?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so what could we do now to value add a little bit more to what you were thinking? So as we were saying with Erin earlier, it's a little bit less cloudy, and so that we have a better conception of what's going on and how you could approach this task.
I don't know. I didn't think of research. I can't do it on the spot.
Oh, okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I kind of like to do that to myself at least once or twice in any discussion. Put myself on the spot where I demonstrate, hey, I don't know this. Let's work on it together. And so let's think then about something I think that might value add to your thinking. And that is, when we've been trying to identify and solve problems in our discussion tonight, is there any way that you're seeing that we're thinking about and conceptualizing the problems? So how do you make sense of the data? What's this an example of?
I don't understand the question.
Cool, I meant it not to make sense so that you would feel as if you could interpret it anyway. No, actually I didn't. Sorry about that. Is there a way of thinking that we've been using that helps you solve problems or identify what are some of the issues? So there was the negative brainstorming one.
Oh, right, yeah.
Okay, so if we know of something that sucks, and as Lily was saying, she just said, okay, well, everything that's bad, I'm going to turn it 180 degrees around and do that.
Okay.
And then we were thinking about that Swiss Army knife of questions. What's this an example of?
Yeah.
And we were looking at the grouping of particular ideas. The thing we haven't touched on, because I think everyone gets really hung up on the data, is how will you lead from one point to another? And we started talking about developing those communities of practice, where you get people working at the same level as you, maybe engaging people, as Lily was saying, in which you present materials to others. You know, heads of discipline and so on. So does that kind of lay out some of the frameworks that are of assistance to you in starting to think about, well, what am I going to lead? How am I going to rationalize the focus on a particular area? Do you feel better equipped now than you did when we started talking?
Yeah, I do.
Excellent.
About 90%.
Only 90. Well, I'm slipping, clearly.
No, I need to pour over everything a little bit more and focus on where I'm going to go. That's all.
That's absolutely perfect. Chris, how are you finding it?
Sorry, as I get myself organised. Yeah, I'm a bit like Lisa. I think I need a bit of time just to process everything that I've heard. I can't do things on the spot. It's quite difficult for me to do that. So, yeah, it's been good just listening because I'm okay at listening. So I try and practice that as much as I can.
Perfect. Okay, so what would be most helpful then from what you're saying is if we catch up again next week. I'm happy to talk with everyone at this time or answer questions at other times if you can't make this time. But what you're doing now is you're starting to think about the problem, conceptualize what the data means, and then start thinking about, well, how will I do something about this? How can I engage others in doing something about this? And in that way, you're starting to address the assessment tasks. So Lisa's focus, for instance, might be on serving the needs of people who are living in, conditions that we wouldn't wish on anyone. and supporting people in that space. With Erin, it might be how can we solve holistic issues across the curriculum. Natalie, for you, it might be something relatively straightforward about improving fundamental performances in early years primary so that grade 5 scores improve. And then you could be thinking about, well, how would I engage my year 5, my year 4, my year 3 colleagues in order to do that? So these are the broad sort of broad brush issues that I would be asking you to think about at the moment. And then I would be asking you perhaps in the coming week to start thinking about, well, is that the best use of my time? Will this have the most impact? And if it did have the most impact, then how could I maximize the influence and the leverage that we could achieve by doing this particular project? And that then leads us to probably the next week, in which we start just finalising, well, how are we going to lead people, ourselves included, how are we going to lead these folks to be even more effective in what they do? So so from my perspective, we're going to be focusing on what we've focused on so far is how do you interpret some of the data? That's why I went straight to the Gutman diagram, because there are concrete examples there that we can use in order to start thinking about what's this an example of, what's the bigger picture we need to solve. Then you're going to start formulating some strategies, as Erin was talking about. And then probably the following week we'll be thinking about, well, how would you lead people to implement those strategies so that you built on everyone's strength? So I've just laid out the next 3 weeks. Does that work for everyone?
Sounds good.
So what else could I be doing now to help you more?
I think I kind of got the idea that when I realised that we don't need to interpret all the data, everybody seemed to agree and have maybe misunderstood around that. Is that right? Everyone else thought that too. So maybe communicating that maybe in the first place to everybody that we don't need to interpret everything. We can choose our focus areas might be a good idea.
Okay, so happy to do that. That'll go out first thing tomorrow morning.
Just thought to help everyone else before they watch this, if they don't.
Absolutely. I know that there is probably just statistically at least one of you who's on the Facebook page. Could you do me a great favour and make a comment along those lines to our colleagues who are using Facebook?
I can do that if you'd like.
Sorry?
I can do that if you'd like, although I'm only in the secondary one.
I'm happy for it to work in whatever way it's going to work best for everyone. So
someone might need to do that to the primary guys, because I'm only in a group with secondary.
I'm in primary, I could do that.
Thanks, Natalie. Appreciate it. And Erin, there's nothing like using every possible grapevine to access every possible student if we can. So choose the focus areas, communicate. You don't have to be so concerned about every single bit of the data analysis. I think what we've demonstrated tonight in just that example that we kind of touched on and worked through, there are multiple ways in which you can interpret data and multiple justifications that you can come to simply by a relatively straightforward investigation of what the data is trying to tell us. Is everyone happy with that? Okay, anything else I could do to make this more simpler, less stressful, less hassleful, and more enjoyable, so that Lily can feel as if it's actually a good experience.
Can I say that I know that people want to, like, maybe they want to format it the way they want to, but can you do a structure that some people may want to follow? Or is there already one on the LMS?
I think I kind of touched on this, Lisa, in one of the posts that I made.
Yeah, it's in one of the posts. I've seen it. There's a few headings that you've mentioned and a subheading as well. So it's in one of the posts somewhere.
Okay, cool.
So Lisa, can I suggest you have a quick look at that one? If you're still not happy, or sorry, that's a terrible thing to say. I didn't mean that. If you would like more information, or if you would prefer more guidance, or if you would prefer a sense of what would be one possible formatting, then let me know.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because if you're thinking it, then at least 10 of your colleagues are thinking it. And so I'm using You Good Folk as my barometer because I can do something about that. So have a quick look. If you think that I've communicated it less well than I could have, please let me know. I have one interest and one interest only. I want you to get it right rather than me be right. So if you find a format or a notion of formatting or an element that you would like expanded on, I'm more than happy to help you with that.
Okay, sounds good.
Anything else, folks? Have we answered all your questions, Sophie?
Sorry, Noel. I came to this intentionally not looking over a lot of the assessment information because I'm the type of person, I like to see the bigger picture before I approach something. So in that respect, I haven't come with any specific questions, but from what I've heard today, it's given me a lot of clarity for how, and I'm already thinking about how I'm going to approach it without understanding a lot of the background stuff, if that makes sense. So I think that's been very useful for me.
I know this might not apply to any of you individually, but I mention it because sometimes it's helpful. When I go to learn something new or address a specific assessment task or whatever, first thing I do is go to a children's book, but let's not go there. Simply because in order to communicate complex ideas to children, you ordinarily have to distill the very essence of a topic. And it often requires people who truly understand something to write children's books, but let's not go there. So when I read a textbook or something similar, the first thing I do is go and look at all of the chapters. And I think about, well, what are the connections between each of these chapters? And so before I really start, I did exactly what you've said, Sophie, and that's form a big picture without necessarily understanding all of the very specific detail down at the bottom. So by bent of the way that my mind works, I start big picture and then start adding knowledge below that. Other people work the opposite way, but the reason I mention this is because some people find it very helpful to sit down and spend a lot of time looking at a rubric and say, so what's the big picture that people are looking for here? How would I demonstrate elements of the rubric? So one of them is lead self and others. So what the heck does that mean? So I think what you're looking at now, Sophie, is that you formed this big picture that looks at leadership of the activities that you're engaging in your own room, within your own person, and how you can leverage that to people around you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. I mention it not because I thought you needed that, but because I thought it might be helpful to share that way of thinking and approaching complex problems. And the reason that I do that is several of our colleagues in this class have said, but no, if what you're saying is right, there's no one correct answer. And I say, yes, you're right. There isn't. What each of you will do in your teaching careers is you will bring your own uniqueness, your own set of skills, your own set of capabilities in order to solve problems and conceptualize those problems in ways no one else ever has. And there's nothing to say that you'll be more or less successful than the person sitting next to you. But what it does say is that you can play to your individual strengths to achieve outcomes along similar lines to what the person will do next to you. And it's that unique approach to solving problems, like these ones with all this data, picking the big picture first, that will make everything work and work well for you in your early years as a teacher in a school, and progressively accepting, as I think Lily was saying, accepting progressively more responsible positions by virtue of the passion that you bring to the situation. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you progress with your thinking over the next little while. Michelle, did you have a question you wanted to raise? Okay, question, additional question, expected turnaround for AT1 feedback. Thank you. I spoke last week and this week with the marketing team, and they're telling me that they're anticipating Monday of next week. So I'll be hunting them down like dogs if they're not able to do that. I'll also get stuck in and lend a hand to get those tasks out to you sooner as well, Michelle. Anything else? Oh dear, okay, got it, Michelle, no problem. Let's, if there aren't any other issues people would like to discuss, is everyone happy we call it quits there?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so same time, same back channel next week.
Yep.
Okay, any questions? If you want to send those ahead of our conversation, I'd be delighted to answer them and pre-prepare. It's not always possible, and sometimes the conversations are quite productive in the way that I hope this one's been for you tonight. Okay, folks, it's been my pleasure to catch up with you, and I look forward to hearing from you on the forums or face-to-face next time around. So enjoy, and I'm looking forward to catching up. And good luck in the meantime with placements and families and everything else that you have going on. I don't know how you manage it, but that you do is a testament to your resilience and your capacities. So well done. All right, folks, we'll see you next week and or on the forums in the meantime. Best wishes to everyone. See you soon.
Thanks, Bye.
Bye.